later on. No? Does it work? Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm sorry about what happened with the tutorial on Friday. I'm not sure why that appeared on your timetable, not on mine. Thanks to the two of you that emailed me straight away, so that I can actually mail you all. The Seats app is a new program, I'm not sure whether you're aware of that. So this year is the first time they're using it. And as you've seen, there are sometimes lectures that apparently are at timetable, others that are not. But I have emailed them, so they're aware of the issue, and so that is not going to impact any of your attendance because that's been removed so far. So today we're going to do two things. I want to spend some time providing you with a general feedback on the midterm questions. As you know, we've seen together the problem solved. We try to discuss the best way you could have possibly answered the question in section A. But I also want to give you some kind of references and in terms of general feedback, the most common mistakes. Now, I've already posted this, so you might have seen it already, but I wanted to talk to you, I want to discuss that today together. And then we're going to go and do our normal lecture. So, one more thing. As you know, I have been doing office hour pretty much since the beginning of term, since we started, basically lecture. So far, I've seen 4 persons, okay, 4 students. One that came straight away, probably 2 that came straight away during lecture time, and 1 that came last week after the midterm grades were released. I will be seeing a few more people today, but now that you all have access to the grades, I really hope to see those that got below 50. That were my sort of target people that I really would like to see. So I think that you might underestimate the value that you can get from discussing your grade, seeing your mistakes. We're going to do it today, and probably I'm thinking about doing a session 1 hour on our last day of last lecture, basically, so that we all get a little bit more feedback on that part. But those of you that got that grade, please come and see me when you can. So for the first question of section A, the question asks you, farmers in rural areas can mitigate risks of agricultural production by using a sharecropping contract or insuring their output. Compare the two solutions, focusing on the different incentives for the tenant. Now, for those of you that took this question, as you can see, I have underlined a few words for you to draw the attention, for you to provide definition. And so what I wanted for you to discuss was sharecropping contract. As we have said many times, we together, we've done like 4 different type of formal model of sharecropping. You could have picked one, any of those, but at least one I would have liked to have seen. Whereas and we will see this in a minute, one of the most common mistakes that I identified is that I was given, so the answer discussed like a definition of sharecropping, but there was no discussion on the mechanism. How does it work? What are the implications? Where do I see that? And that for me was one of the biggest issues. You won't get penalized in the sense that it's not a wrong answer, but it's not complete. Okay? So you could have discussed the sharecropping contract, focusing on the risk-sharing aspect, talk about the limited liability constraint, and how does that impact the incentives. Probably, I say here that the sharecropping contract with the risk-sharing approach would have been the most appropriate, but this is my personal view, okay? Then you could have discussed the insurance contract, and we have seen what are the issues associated to an insurance contract. So we discussed how sometimes that has to entail a group of people rather than individual. The things that we can observe, and where that's the fact that not observing outcomes or effort might have an impact. We discussed the insurance contract in more detail with some reference to risk preferences, average income. Some of you, again, provided not even a definition of what an insurance contract might be. And certainly the majority of the mistakes relate to the fact there was no much of discussion. Do you remember I left you sort of a little bit of calculation to do? I haven't seen any of you doing that. So the discussion that came out from that was very general, very vague, something that not a third-year student coming out from an economics degree should do. As an extension, if you want, you could talk about group insurance and how all this mechanism in terms of enforcing contract, social sanction may contribute by choosing one of the two. But then definitely one of the aspects that I wanted to, for you to analyze was the difference between the two options when it comes to incentives. Now, what is it? I must say that a lot of you got it right, so that I was pleased. What is it, the biggest difference between the two options when it comes to incentives? Those of you that took this question. What did you say? What did you write? Yes.
Since the portion of any sharecropping, since the portion of any additional output gives the landlord the tenant may have less incentive to increase effort, many will receive the full benefits.
Mm-hmm. And what's the problem associated with the insurance instead? So when we discuss the sharecropping contract, we analyze, and in particular we focus on the fact, which is also associated to the following question, that whatever you produce more, it's going to be split between the landlord and the tenant. So at some point, because what you're fixing is a fraction, and it's not a lump sum, a fixed tax that you impose in some sense on production. Because I multiply this times y, whatever our y might be, the higher is y, the higher will be the amount, because you time it like this, that will go to the landlord anyway. So at some point you could kind of say, but why should I keep producing more? Whatever I get of this y will still be a fraction, will not be the entire thing. So there's a slightly distortion incentive effect that we analyzed very well last week when it comes to production. Yes?
Wouldn't that theory just apply at any stage of output? Like, why does it diminish as the output goes up?
Sorry, say it again.
So, like, why would the become more, like, why would they be discouraged to produce, like, higher the output?
Can somebody answer that, please?
Because they have to give like the same fixed output of Y. So as you increase Y, output increases, so they give more to the proportion of their output to the landlord. So like if you're making like 10 units and output 0.5, you don't have to give them 5. But if it's 200, then you have to give them double that.
I'll show you the difference. Let's see whether that is correct, right? So let's say that whatever you produce, you're going to give to the landlord 50. So if you produce 100, what does that mean? So you have to share half of that, right? What if you produce 200? This is fixed, okay? So that doesn't change. What if you produce 1,000? You don't get to keep more. Because what you're having is, what you're keeping as this increases as well. And so the amount that the landlord is going to get is going to weigh, in some sense, less the bigger is the production. Because it's fixed. It doesn't change with the outcome. Whereas if I say that we fix alpha like 10%, okay? So the 10% of 100 is one thing, but the 10% of 200 is still the 10%, okay? So the more you produce, but this is kept fixed, compared to this instead, where what you keep fixed is just the amount, not the percentage. So the more you produce, the smaller that becomes to a certain extent, right? The weight of this tax that you have to pay to the landlord to compensate him of the fact that he allows you to use his land is going to weigh less. And so you have still the incentive to invest effort in production, because you're going to keep all the rest, taking away this 50. Not in this case. So with the insurance instead, you have a less distortionary effect on production, because basically you insure yourself against a bad outcome, but that does not affect the effort on production. Now, insurance has a lot of other issues that we discussed, that we've seen related to what you can observe, what you cannot observe. But in terms of distortionary incentives or effect on production, has a less impact. And this is what I want you to state and show in whatever way you thought appropriate. So if I have to make a list of the most common mistakes, I would say that some of the replies were a little bit unbalanced in terms that the two options were not discussed sort of equally, a lot of weight on one, a lot less weight on the others. But then or some of the questions, some of the answers were discussing very much in general what a sharecropping contract is, and what the an insurance contract might be. But as I said, the main point for me was the fact that there was no reference, no discussion of the mechanism behind any definition provided. And so, as I said, for me, rather than seeing unnecessary material or wrong statement, which in some cases there were, the biggest point, the biggest fault that I identified was the fact that answers were not really complete. There was a lot lacking. Questions? Yes?
I know it sounds a bit obvious, but what do you mean by not being complete?
So not being complete is what I just said, meaning that mainly a definition was provided, but there was no backing up of the statement. And so the outcome, the way in which the answer was provided, came out really general, really basic. There was no explanation or showing that you understand the mechanism behind. Identifying where the risk happened, how does it work, what are the consequences for the parties involved. This is what I wanted to see, besides the definition. Is it better? Does that make sense? As I said, I didn't ask you specifically, and this is also to answer to, as I said last week, to one of the feedback that you kindly wrote when we did when I asked you to fill the 1-minute survey, in terms of there's a lot of material for this module. And I appreciate that being true to a certain extent, and also not being straightforward. But there's also part of me saying that true to a certain extent, because what I would have liked to see here, it would have been any of the working out, modeling that we have discussed without any specific reference to this. And that reduces a lot in terms of completing material that we have done together. Any other question? No? You sure?
Sorry.
Second question. Explain the reduction in effort associated to a sharecropping contract versus a non-operated land system. Discuss the implication for the trade-off incentive insurance. So, similarly to what we've done before, you could have discussed first what sharecropping is, and how does this split the risk between tenant and landlord. You could have used the graph that we have seen where we analyze the production that you get under a non-operated system versus a sharecropping system. You could have explained how does that change, why does the slope of the production function change, what is the implication for the final outcome. And then you could have used, once you have discussed the alpha with the graph, you could have used the linear sharing rule model to discuss where actually an optimal alpha can be found. How do I get an optimal alpha? How do I choose, as a landlord, the best value of alpha, which still provides incentives to the tenant to produce, to exert the high level of effort, but at the same time does not, still provides me with a sufficient amount of income for my investment. This is what I would have liked to see, pretty much. And again, not many of you, although some did, discuss the difference between the sharecropping contract and the own operated system, but not many use the graph. I think that no one included the linear sharing rule model. So there was no explanation of where an optimal alpha can be found, how do I find it, what are the implications for the limited liability constraint when we're using this sort of modeling. So all these sort of things that would have explained to me a little bit more that you kind of are familiar with, the working out of this and the effect on the incentives. So again, for the first part of the question, you could have discussed and make reference from any sharecropping module. In here, I would say that probably the question was a little bit easier in the sense that there was a more specific reference in terms of the material that we have covered. But then again, it seems that especially the more theoretical aspect of this was not something that you have identified or that matches with the rest of the question. Any question? Yes?
Is own-operated land system the same as wage contracts, or is that different?
Can somebody answer that? So he has asked whether the own-operated system is similar to the wage contract. Let's discuss the difference. What's a wage contract?
No matter what I produce, I will get W. So like, if I produce 0, I get 500. If I produce 2,000, I will still get 500.
So who is who and who receive what?
So the farmer receives 500 as a wage, and
The tenant, right?
The
Yeah.
tenant, and
Yeah.
The landlord then will receive the whole output, no matter if it's 0 or 2,000. And the own-operated land, what you make, it's basically your wage. You own the land. So if you do not produce anything, you will get 0. But if you produce 2,000, you will get the 2,000.
Do we all agree with this? So in a wage contract, you work as an employee of your landlord, and the landlord said, whatever production you're going to make, I'm going to pay you 500 per month. Okay? So in this case, you are in a position of subordinate position respect to the landlord. He is the owner, and you work for him. And no matter what outcome you get, this will be your pay, 500. In the own-operated system, instead, you are the owner. You work for yourself. Okay? So there's no one, in some sense, you are the boss. You are the employer and the employee at the same time. With all the difference that you can imagine straight away with the incentives. The wage contract provides you a lot of what? A lot of insurance, because no matter what, you get 500. So you're very secure in your income. But on the other hand, because it provides you a lot of insurance, what does not provide you with? Incentives, right? Because of the trade-off. Because you're going to get 500 no matter what will be your incentive to exert the high level of effort? Any other question? One thing that to be fair, is the first time that it happened this year, is that I had quite few emails. I mean, not many, but few emails that without any explanation and without any, in some sense, providing any support, were just asking for a regrade. Now, I find this quite disrespectful in the sense that both me and the other course convener that you will meet next week spent quite some time marking, reading, and trying to provide detailed comment and feedback. It has happened to me in the past that I regraded exam when the person came, showed me, because there's a huge volume, that the person came to me and said, actually, can we look at this together? We'll look at this together, and there were things that were overlooked or that actually were correct, just written not in a very good way. And so it has happened in the past, not frequently, that I have changed the initial grade. But I find quite disrespectful just sending an email without any sort of context, without any sort of description, just say, hey, I got this, I'm not happy, can you regrade this? Now, I'm saying this just for you that will be out of here in less than 6 months or so, probably 6 months or so. You're going to enter job market, you're going to go, for those of you that will, postgraduate education. This is not a really mature attitude. So I really, I think that entering in a discussion where you challenge a grade is fine, it's perfectly fine. But the way in which it has to be done, it must be appropriate. Appropriate to your age, appropriate to your context, appropriate to the environment you're in. And this is my advice for you guys, okay? So whenever you do this sort of things, try to be appropriate and to the, you know, to the context in which you're in. Because otherwise the effect that it produces is not great. And here at uni, I wouldn't say it's fine, but definitely we have a very high level of tolerance. Outside of here, the tolerance degree is really low. Any other question or any other comment?
During the final exam, will it be 2 math questions and 2 essays?
So the final exam will have 4 essay questions, and you can choose 2 to do, and 2 problems, and you can choose 1. Exactly as there will be, basically compared to the midterm, you will have 1 only extra essay question to answer. Yes?
And are the points also split into 3 parts, so every thing counts 1/3, like the points?
So the points will be section A, 25 points per question, and section B, 50 points per problem. Yes? No, the exam will be online again, but timed. I don't even know what date. I get to be notified the same day as you, but when I will know, I will send you an email to make sure that you all know about this. Okay? We don't get any input on the timetable or the timing or anything. The only thing I know, which has been introduced from this year, that they will try to time all the online timed exam before 2 p.m. So to end around 2 p.m. Simply because they want the they don't want the admin to have to stay too late if there is any issue associated with submission like the one that we had. Hopefully that will not happen again. So that's the only thing I know about the timing. Any other question? Okay, so today's lecture in today's lecture, we're going to look at the final, probably topic, I would say, not necessarily topic because it's complementing what we did last week, but what we're going to do today, we're focusing only on empirical papers. So we're going to look at mainly the proof of the theoretical results that we saw last week. Again, we're talking about institution. If you remember, on the very first lecture, I told you that we would have looked at the why countries tend to grow more than others, and what is the explanation behind this. So today's lecture, hopefully, will bring it all together from where we started. The way that we took to get here is a very specific one, and is mainly driven by the fact that I believe that this, the explanation for this can be summarized in the papers that we will discuss today, which are the one that got Acemoglu, Robinson, and Johnson the Nobel Prize this year. So it's the 3 papers that they did together, and for which they got the Nobel Prize recognition. So if you remember, when we discussed the output and growth, we can possibly identify growth as a Y function, any production function, as a function of labor and capital, so the inputs. And if you remember from your other module, in terms of neoclassical growth model, the idea that to explain why some countries grow more than others basically lies in these 2 factors. Some countries are more endowed of better labor intended with health and education. Some countries instead might be endowed with better capital thought in terms of investment in natural resources, access to credit markets. But in this neoclassical growth, each element, meaning the way in which these inputs are combined, was basically considered completely perfect information, perfectly working, and with no sort of friction that can come from this. So any variation in whatever kind of institution, F, that you can think of, was not considered a source of income difference. Everything else, yes, but this. As we defined, and we saw from the definition of Douglas North, how can we define institution? And we said that institution can be defined as the rule of games that define and shape the interaction among individuals, and eventually produce the incentive with the human exchange, and that could be political, social, or economic. Why they are so important? Because they affect the way in which incentive to invest can be made, how the production can be organized, and eventually how these resources get allocated among the individuals. And in particular, when we talk about allocation of resources, we want to think about property rights and the presence of markets, and how do they work. So today, or I should say probably in the recent past, one of the main 2 hypotheses that are considered responsible for income differences across countries in the world were considered the geography hypothesis and the institution hypothesis. The way in which these 2 hypotheses have been tested is with a series of these 3 papers, which we will cover today in a very specific manner. So I'll tell you exactly what to read, although they are fairly simple in terms of the econometrics. The most complicated part is the identification strategy, but this stuff, we will do it together. And again, these are the 3 papers that got the Nobel Prize to Acemoglu, Robinson, and Johnson. Basically, the arguments has been developed in the 3 together, and this is why we're doing it one after the other. If you are interested and maybe not so keen on the econometric part, the content of these papers has been summarized in the book Why Nations Fail, which is a lot easier and a lot more probably enjoyable than some of the parts of the papers. So, why do countries differ in terms of growth? And why do we have, in some countries, a very high level of growth, compared to others that instead are still considered developing countries. As we anticipated, there are two main hypotheses identified. One is the geography hypothesis, and the other one is the economic institution. According to the geographic hypothesis, the differences among countries has to be found in the role of nature. So the fact that some countries are located in a particular area, think about the equatorial line mainly, can have impact, especially on the work effort. I usually said that according to this hypothesis, that along the equatorial line is more complicated to work because of the heat, because of the condition, because of the soil condition, because of the type of weather condition. And so people tend to be more vigorous and active and producing a higher level of effort when working in cold or temperate climates. So this is called the simple geographic hypothesis, as one which is slightly more sophisticated. And this basically matches the geographic condition of a country with the level of technology available. So rather than saying that it's just simply the location and factors that you cannot change, because you can't change the geographic position of a country, that affect the level of effort, the sophisticated geographic hypothesis say, well, actually, certain sort of condition that you might find associated with weather condition, soil condition, natural resources condition, can eventually have an impact on the technology available. So it's not just the climate, but the climate that favors certain type, the adoption of certain type of technology. And specifically, this is more easy and adaptable to happen in temperate zone versus the tropical one. Have you heard of the book by Jared Diamond? Germs, Guns and Steel? None of you? Anyone doing, have you? Anyone doing PPE, for example? So in this book, this researcher discussed the idea that basically only the reason why certain civilizations, certain countries grew more faster and better than others is basically due to whether the geographic location was associated along the equatorial line, whether they could fight germs, and whether they had access to steel. So these were the three sort of conditions. It's a political economy book, but quite interesting to explain the geographic hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis instead is the institution hypothesis that says, well, actually, the reason why some countries grow better than others must be found in the way in which humans organize their society. So they organize themselves. And when we talk about organization of society, we mainly talk about property rights. So as we now know, the way in which individuals have incentive to invest, innovate in their own production, but also access to equal opportunities, so that good opportunities of investment not only can be recognized, but can find the actual fertile soil to grow and develop. So that individuals that can have access to secure property rights, think about the model that we discussed last week and the difference between probability of expropriation that today we will see in action and can be quantified, can have a huge impact on the way in which market can be created and eventually improved. Once we acknowledge from market perspective, as a consequence, what comes out of this is a very good and efficient allocation of resources. And once you get back, in some sense, with the allocation of resources, what you have invested, that will give you even higher incentive to keep doing this, because you know that whatever you have invested will come back to you. Think about again to the model of the king and the farmer that we saw last week. Now, how do we test whether the geographic hypothesis or the institution hypothesis is the right one in explaining the differences among countries in the world? Well, what I do in this series of papers, this researcher, they identify something that happened in the history, meaning the European colonization, and decide to use it, this sort of natural experiment, to see which one is able to explain better or with a higher percentage of variance the difference in growth. Why do we label this and call it natural experiment? This is something that gets done a lot, especially recently, probably say in the last 10 years, in economics. Remember that we discuss experiment, right? And we discuss RCT, randomized controlled trials. How does this, an example like this, differs from the one that we have discussed a few lectures ago? Try. Yeah.
It's not a controlled environment.
Very good. Tell me more.
So it's not like a experiment that's in a lab or anything. It's just kind of observing what happens in the real world.
So, very true that there's no research or intervention. This is not an environment that has been created or imposed by a researcher. But why can I use it and test it exactly in the same way that I would do with an RCT? Meaning I can use the same econometric techniques, for example. I can use different sort of estimates. Where does the variation comes in, and how this variation has to be? Yes?
Maybe the variation is in the sample, because, for example, majority of countries that were colonized were African countries, but we still differ by climate. You can take a country that is in Sahara Desert, and you can take the one that is on the equator.
So this is certainly a difference, but this is a difference which is not time variant. Okay? Think about that, and this is something that we will discuss a lot today. Any difference that you might have in the geographic elements, think about the weather, think about the location, think about the soil condition. This is something which is time invariant. Africa was there pretty much with very little variation 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and it's still there. Okay? It has not moved up and down. Same for France, same for the UK. So why can we use events that happen in history and treat them as an exogenous variation? What's the rationale behind? I'm telling you because a lot of papers that are produced today use this sort of natural experiment technique or approach to, first of all, to avoid the RCT pros and cons that we discussed a few weeks ago, but also to explore other research questions that will not be allowed to be produced in an RCT environment. So where does the variation here comes from? Yeah?
So if we say that there are only the two variables on the geography part and the institution part, and we say that the geography part is constant, then maybe we can assume that every change that happened over the years is only due to the institution change.
So this is the claim that they make in the paper, right? And this is the rationale that they will use to test it. What I want to draw your attention on is the fact that there might be events in history that basically determine a before and an after. This is something that it could be a war, it could be like this, a change in type of the institution. Think about the colonization process. You can think about a policy. As a government, I do introduce a new policy. Because this has been introduced by the government institution or, definitely not the researcher, that can be considered exogenous to the environment that produce and actually get the change as a consequence. And by naturally splitting, in terms of timing, the observation that you have access to a before and an after, allows you to use exactly the same econometric module that you would see in an RCT. The only difference is that this has been created not by the researcher. As one of your colleagues said before, not in a controlled way. Yes?
How do you control for, there's a lot of variation, like the European power that did the colonization, and then obviously like the country as well.
Yeah.
And then, loads of factors like different raw materials, like different purposes, whether they wanted labor or they wanted,
Sure, there will be a lot of variation, and a lot of this cannot be captured or explained. But the question that we have to ask is whether any of this is going to be having an impact on growth. So whenever you think about this, think about whether any of this element is something that you want to control for, and then eventually might just fall in your unobservable. Think about the error that you get in a regression. Or whether this is going to have a real impact on the on growth, which is the variable that today we are interested in. It might be there or not. It might be that these are nuances that can help us to define or characterize certain environments, but when it comes to the actual impact on growth, you might not be observing a big change. Okay? So the idea that they have is to basically split samples of countries that we were going to look at in a minute and look at those that used to be European colonies compared to those that were not. And the rationale behind this is that when we look and test this two hypothesis, that first of all, the geography, as we said, is held constant, so it's not going to vary over time, whereas the institution did change over time. And in particular, they distinguish between institution of property rights and extractive institution. Institution of property rights are the one that we can consider closer to the one that we have today, whereas extractive institutions are those that, and we will see that shortly, basically took every sort of resource or outcome or products that can be coming from the colonies without leaving anything in exchange. So if the geographic factors are the one explaining differences across countries, those should be, given that they are time invariant, we should observe that those countries that were rich, say in the 1500s, should still be rich today, because economic outcomes, if driven by geography, since geography hasn't changed, should not have changed. If instead the institution matter, we would observe a divergence in the prosperity among the European colonies. And we will see in a minute where does this difference come from. I'll stop here for a 5-minute break, okay?
Then you just said if a country is rich in 1500, it's still be rich now.
Yes.
Why is that so?
We will see that in a minute. I'll tell you what. Okay?
How does the timing vary? I don't quite get that.
So timing there, it means it doesn't change over time.
So, like
So
the
think
land
about
is-
the equator line. So the equator line is there. You know, you have some countries along the equator line. Which one is Uganda? One is a little bit of Tanzania. But that hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Okay, so, you know, Africa was hot in the 1500s and it's still hot today. We still have dry season and wet season.
Yeah.
This is something that hasn't changed.
And you know, here when you said the temperate zone technologies were more productive,
Yeah.
I didn't quite grasp why.
So,
or do we need to know
so
why?
the idea, if you read the paper, that will come up very clearly. But the idea basically is that if you think about production, it's easier to produce in climates that are more temperate. Think about like Europe, you know, where you have different season, when you have rain season, but also have the hot season, compared to areas which are just not changing. Think about desert areas, right?
Yeah.
So these are a lot more complicated to get production out. Is that due to the people there? Is that due to the effort? No. People, those that support the hypothesis will say, well, this is a country with 40 degrees the entire year, where there's no rain, water whatsoever, not navigable rivers or a canal. So how can you produce an environment like that?
So even though they might have the same technology, due to the climate conditions, technology works better.
Exactly. This is the simple hypothesis. Rather than the sophisticated hypothesis, some would say, well, actually, there are some kind of condition, geographic condition, that can favor production. So one of the reasons why they say that the Industrial Revolution was born in the UK is because there was a lot of endowment of coal, so natural resources, but also there were a lot of navigable canals that can use to transport production. So this is a geographic factor. You have natural resources, but I'm not saying that this is just the determinant. I'm just saying that this natural condition favor technology.
It's a fact, it's like a positive
Exactly, exactly. Does that make sense? Yes.
Don't give me the code. I come late. How many things? Thanks.
Hi.
I got 2 different grades for the midterm. Can I just assume it's the higher? Okay, thank you.
We don't need to remind you with it.
I need to check why this happened.
Okay.
I need to check. I think one of you remains should be continued. So there's another. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. There was a big difference between the two.
Well, for me it was like 10 points.
I will have, can you email me this?
Okay.
I will have to.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you.
But it was like a difference in like actual.
Yeah. I really don't know why this has happened, and I need to check because that is usually a mistake. It might be that. So what I assume is that it's actually not. Sorry guys, can I ask you one question? Do you have in your timetable tutorial for this Friday or not? No. Next Friday should be. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes.
It's saying it's not. That's the right one though, right?
I hope so.
Yeah, 5, 5, 8, 8, 8.
Do you have enough connection? Yes, correct.
Oh, yeah, maybe connection. I don't care. Yeah,
Try to change. Yeah, see whether it's you get better location.
I just wanted to ask, so is there a week 6 assignment or not, or is week 5 and 6 the same one? Because there's a submission box for week 6, but there's no actual question.
No, it's just one for both weeks.
Both of them.
I'm not sure what they're doing with this submission box, but I'll check them out.
Yeah, no, it is there, but
Yeah.
obviously it says week 6 submission, week 5 submission.
Because I didn't. So they have just made one, I think, for every week, assuming that there was one every week.
Yeah,
Whereas that goes with topics sometimes and not by week.
I understand. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. Okay, so the first paper that we analyzed today is called The Reversal of Fortune, and the authors ask, what was the world income distribution in 1500 and today? As you can imagine, one of the issues associated to dealing with this research question is that we don't have any information for income in the 1500s. So there were no surveys, there were no sort of data collection that can be made geographically in a way that will create a sample that I could use to do any data analysis that you might be thinking of. So authors have been very creative and clever and thought about what could I else use that will give me a good idea of what was the income in the 1500s, despite the fact that I don't have this information. And the proxies that they use, which is a variable, a proxy is a way to call a variable that does not really perfectly fit the data that I have in mind, but that could be considered closely related. So the two variables that they use, one is the urbanization rate, and the other one is population density. The rationale behind the choice of these two variables is that, first of all, we have, so these are data that are available for the 1500 by country. Of course, you have to consider not many observations, but still they are available, collected by other researchers. Now, what is the key argument here is to show that both of them can be considered a good proxy for income. What's the rationale behind it? So the argument that the authors use is that, well, if I consider an area with a very high urbanization rate, I can think that the agricultural surplus and the transport system and the level of commerce that I will get in that area must be high. Why? Because it has to support a large community, a large area densely populated. And so I can think that the urbanization rate and population density will be possibly a good proxy for income. Once they establish that, what they're going to do after is to plot some correlation. Again, no causation implication here. We just want to plot on the same graph how these two variables go together or not. And let's start by doing this with the urbanization rate and GDP per capita in 1995. Then, if we find that actually these two go together and there's a quite a nice linear relationship between the two, then I can use the urbanization rate and population density that I have for the 1500 as a proxy for income, and then plot it for GDP per capita in 1995 to see whether countries that were rich in the 1500 are still rich today. Remember what the geographic hypothesis says. If the geographic hypothesis is correct, we should still see a positive relationship between urbanization rate and population density in 1500, proxy for income, and income today. It's not today, you have to think about these are papers that were published in the early 2000s, so they were using data from a little bit earlier on. So for them today is 1995, okay? This is why the year, this is the reason why you will see that year and that data coming from that year specifically. What they do then to test whether the institutional hypothesis instead is correct, they compare results for former colonies versus countries that were never a colony and see what happened there. So, as I anticipated, the first graph that we see, this is a simple correlation. We look at the urbanization rate in 1995 and the log of GDP per capita in 1995. As you can see, the relationship is quite straight, linear, and positive. Meaning that, as we have said before, it might be reasonable to think that areas with a high level of urbanization, although the definition of urbanization changes a little bit from country to country, do actually present higher level of income per capita. As you can see in the higher part of the graph, we have the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, and other countries. Now that we are sure that we can use the urbanization rate as a very good proxy for income, we go and use it for the to supplement the fact that we don't have any income level for the 1500. And we plot, again, on the same graph, correlation of the GDP per capita in 1995 and the urbanization rate in 1500. The countries that are selected in this sample are former colonies, so countries that at some point in their past have been colonized by other countries. Here, the colonization that we're talking about is Western European colonies, okay? What can you see? What can you tell me? How is the relationship? What countries do we find next to the not very high percentage of urbanization versus the GDP per capita in the 1995? How would you read that? What would be your conclusion from a graph like that? Yes?
Very weak correlation.
Okay, where mainly?
Mainly in the urbanization, might even be transferring.
But still we can plot some kind of relationship, right? It's not great. Think about here, guys, we're looking at data from the 1500s, so we're very, very scattered level of observation, very few level of observation, not much power in the calculation. So we have to be, we have to grant a little bit of slack to this data analysis, okay? Yes? I saw a hand.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, could you say that countries that were experiencing like higher GDP per capita generally experience low urbanization, like basically less like compensation, but then it's not that strongly related.
So, yeah, so guys, how do we read this graph? Yeah.
Is it that when these places that take on also the urbanization kind of growth, and that's what's made their GDPs high later on?
Okay, so getting closer. So countries that had a very low level of urbanization in the 1500s do have a high level of GDP today. Do we agree with this? So we are looking at, think about what we said about the urbanization rate as a proxy. We can say that countries, former colonies, that were not very rich in the 1500s are very rich today. And the relationship is actually negative. Linear, not very much, because as your colleague was saying, still we have a linear relationship plotted here, but especially towards the lower part of the graph is a little bit more confused. It gets a little bit more, it gets better towards the second part, but not very at the beginning. But still the relationship is negative, meaning, consider what we said about the proxy, that the countries that used to be former colonies, that used to be not very rich back then, are instead rich today.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You just said countries that were not very rich back then.
1500. Remember that we said that this, guys, you have to bear with me, because the identification strategy of these papers is actually quite tricky, okay? So we're going to go very slowly, step by step, but there's a lot of association. As I said, the econometric model is very easy, it's OLS, but the identification strategy requires a lot of association, okay? And this is what we call the economic mechanism, which might not be extremely easy. So let's start from the beginning. I want to understand why today some countries are richer than others, okay? So I have two hypotheses to test: geographic hypothesis, institutions hypothesis. Some people, researchers, say, hey, the reason why you observe these differences between countries is due to the fact that some of them lie in areas where it's very difficult to work, soil condition is very complicated, access to resources is very complicated, and so they cannot grow. Others will say, no, actually this is not the problem. Inputs are not the problem. The problem is the way in which we combine them, meaning institutions. How do we test that? Let's look at the history, so how these countries have grown over time. Ideally, I would like to have income per capita in 1500 from a range of countries. Unfortunately, I cannot have this information. At the time, data were not collected, so I have to find something else to proxy income per capita. What is this something else? Urbanization and population density. I showed you before that today we can say that there's a quite straight and positive and linear line association between GDP per capita and urbanization. So I can say that the level of urbanization today proxies the level of GDP per capita today. Great news. Why? Because I do have information for urbanization in the 1500s. And I can use it to proxy GDP per capita in the 1500s, which I don't have. I plot this this graph for former colonies, and what do I find? I find that actually, in the past, 1500, some of these colonies were very poor, but then eventually became really rich later on, today, 1995. Let's change variable. Let's use the other proxy to show that my findings are correct and will stand change in terms of variable. Population density. As you can see here, this is even more sharp in terms of negative correlation. And again, we can see that those countries that used to be very sparsely populated in the 1500s, still colonies, are very rich today. So there is an association. Countries poor and scarcely populated in the 1500s, rich today. What happened to the non-colonies? For the non-colonies, you can see that relationships is actually the opposite. Again, we look at the urbanization in the 1500s and GDP per capita today. What can we say about this relationship? How does it look like? Yeah?
It's quite weak, but overall, like, positive for us, strong positive.
So the strength, what you call the strength, is actually associated to the shape of the correlation, okay? Remember that correlation is mainly linear. The coefficient of correlation is merely tests as linear relationship. So here, the correlation is positive. Linear, maybe not that much, especially in the second part, but still positive. What does that mean? How do we read this graph?
So the higher was urbanization in 1500s, the richer the country is now, like Belgium or the Netherlands.
So countries that, very good, countries that used to be rich non-colonies in the 1500s are still rich today. Whereas countries that were poor in the 1500s are still poor today. Albania, Romania, Poland, okay? So for the former colonies, at some point, things change. They were poor in the 1500s, they are rich today. At some point, there was what they call a reversal of fortune. They passed from being very poor to becoming very rich today. And if we look at this is another graph that comes, so all the graphs and tables come from the paper, directly from the paper, so you will see them when you read it. And in particular, it seems that the time when this reversal of fortune happened, where this change happened, is in between the late 1700s and the 1800s. As you can see, what they do plot in this graph is countries with low urbanization in 1500, which is this red line here. So it was quite low urbanization, but then it gets really high. Countries with high urbanization in the 1500s, they stay pretty much stable, but then after here actually goes down a little bit. And then you have the two cases of India and the USA, where basically what it was the urbanization rate of India in the 1500s gets completely overtaken by what happened in the USA. And you can see that the USA, in fact, is a steeper line in the graph. So from this sort of findings, they complement the correlation with some estimates that you can see, and this will be the summary of finding. So today we can say, so 1995, there's a positive and significant relationship between urbanization and income per capita. Think about the graph that I show you correlation, but then they test this effect with a regression. So they provide causality for this, right? Former colonies with a higher urbanization rate and population density in the 1500s have lower income per capita today. On the contrary, the non-colonies with a higher urbanization in the 1500s have higher income per capita today. Think about the positive relationship that we saw. So for the non-colonies, for the colonies, there was at some point a reversal of fortune. Previously poor colonies surpassed the former highly urbanized colonies in between the 18th and the 19th century. And the researchers claim that this is associated with this event in time that happened in Europe, which is the Industrial Revolution. So, in light of this finding, what can we conclude about the two hypotheses that we discussed earlier on? The simple geographic hypothesis will not stand, right? Because it's based on factors that do not change over time. Whereas what we see here, that there has been a change, a transformation completely, that affects specifically former colonies. How about the sophisticated geographic hypothesis, so the one that basically considers the natural environment as more susceptible, adaptable for certain technologies? Well, this will still be possible in some sense, but the problem is the timing. We can still say that the Industrial Revolution was born in the UK because of some geographic condition. Think about the coal mines, natural resources. Think about the availability of navigable canals and rivers. But still, the problem is that this apparently is a change that, if we trust this hypothesis, should have happened a lot earlier than the Industrial Revolution. Basically, they claim almost 200 years earlier. So the timing, if we consider the geographic hypothesis and the sophisticated geographic hypothesis, is not able to explain what we observe today. So the differences in countries that we observe today. And so they claim that the difference that we observe today is actually due to the institution. Relatively rich places in the past got worse economic institutions, and therefore they became relatively poor. Remember what type of distinction we made between institutions at the very beginning. We said institution of property rights and extractive institutions. The idea is that countries that were very rich in terms of natural resources and endowment in the 1500s were basically exploited by the colonizers, and therefore they became poor later on. At the same time, those that were not colonies instead benefited from the exploitation, and this is where they became even richer later on. So, in terms of timing, the reversal of fortune is actually consistent with the Industrial Revolution time. And so what they claim and conclude in this paper is that economic institutions are much more important than the natural resources or geographic condition that you might have, because at that time, the time of the Industrial Revolution, because they were better organized, they provided better condition and relationship between individuals, they protected the opportunity for investment and favor those opportunities of investment, which make then the countries grow a lot more. Now, the question is, what is the relationship between European colonization policies and the type of institutions that were created? Why the institutions can affect economic growth and why there is a persistence of this effect over time. This is the sort of research question that they explore in the second paper associated to this research project, which is called the Colonial Origins and Comparative Development. So the idea is why some countries got better institutions than others. We saw that there's a big decision between former colonies and non-colonies. So what they claim is that better institutions were set up in places where settlers, European settlers, had a longer time horizon. And the colonial stated institution persistent even after their independence, which actually came in many cases quite late, because we're talking about probably a little bit more than 100 years ago. Those institutions are the ones that affect the economic performance today. So the reason why some countries got better institutions than others is mainly driven by the possibility of settling. And this is the very, very clever identification strategy that they use for this paper. The idea is that the colonies provided a disease environment that was not favorable to European settlers, mainly because of the disease that they found. Think about that. At that time, malaria and yellow fever were very diseases which were very unknown. They didn't know how to function. They didn't know what was the causes that can impact European travelers. But what they know is that actually they created a very high rate of mortality among Europeans, which was not the same among local population. Local population were much able to cope with both diseases. Still today, in many countries, one of the more important vaccines that they ask you as soon as you step down and you cannot enter without is the yellow fever one. Okay? So this is an extreme, still today, important sort of vaccine that you have to have as a traveler. Among the Europeans, the rate of mortality because of the disease was very high, 90%. So what happened, what they think, is that Europeans were able to settle a lot more in countries, we're talking about colonies here, where these two sort of very dangerous disease didn't have a huge impact on the settlers. And so they want to use settler mortality in the 17 and 1900 as a proxy for institution development on former colonies. Now I'm asking you, what is the assumption that allows the researcher to make this claim? Yeah.
That more European settlements would improve the institutions, or they'd be more based on property rights rather than extraction.
So, say it again.
More European settlements would lead to better institutions because they're based on property rights rather than extraction.
So this is the claim that they want to test, okay? So this is the claim. But in order to make this claim, to test this hypothesis, this is their hypothesis. To test this hypothesis, they have to make a very important assumption. Otherwise, the identification strategy will be invalid, meaning the results that you may get will be biased. So I want to test this, but in order to test this, what is the assumption that I have to make? You might have heard that as labeled as the exclusion restriction.
I was just going to say that you're assuming that the European centres will act on behalf of, like, in line with the institution.
Again, this is the claim. this is what they want to test. This is their underlying hypothesis.
There's less evidence on the higher mortality rate.
But what is it that allows you to use this as an instrument? Remember what you do when you choose instruments. What's the assumption that you have to make that otherwise will invalidate all your econometric strategy? I'm telling you this, guys, because again, the econometrics behind this is very simple, but the intuition behind it is very complex, and in my opinion, could only be formulated and made by people with a huge and extensive knowledge of the politics, historical condition, and economic condition of the countries they were studying. Yes?
Is it that European mortality rates are correlated with institutions but not with economic growth?
Very good. Very close to the right statement. The assumption is that the European sector mortality rate in the 1700s does not have any impact with GDP growth today. And the only effect will be via the institution. Okay? So this is the idea, this is the assumption that they make. They claim, why should the European sector mortality rate in the 1700s affect growth today? There's no direct effect. The only effect happens via the institution. And this is why I can use it as an instrument. Okay? And this will be the question that you ask all the time when you choose an instrument if you have to undertake any IB regression. Yes?
Sorry, what's the dependent variable of GDP growth?
So we will see, but yes, they test it as GDP growth. Yeah. In the next paper, they use like a bunch of different dependent variables. But one of these, this is for sure. And the extra claim that they make is actually that the extractive state were established in colonies where European mortality rate was very high. The idea being is that because of the disease environment that the European settlers found, they couldn't settle because otherwise it would just die of malaria and yellow fever. And so what happened is that they basically implemented there, if we can say implement, only extractive institution. There was no exchange, real exchange between the colonizer and the colonies instead. It was just basically getting the natural resources, the produce that they can, but without leaving or changing the institution environment, because the disease environment will not allow them to survive. Once we understand the difference between extractive and non-extractive institution, we have to ask ourselves, how come things that happen in the 1500s do still affect the rate of growth today? So how come the persistence of these elements of institution can last so many centuries? And they identify 3 reasons why this happened. The first one is that the setting up institution is costly, and so any change associated to this is gonna be costly. There were local elites that actually promoted the interests of the colonizer, because remember that in this sort of environment, colonizer has to use local chief or local head of state to implement what they were kind of wanting, and they were definitely reluctant to any possible change from this status quo. So because of the interests of the elite, there was some resistance to any change. And the other reason that they identify is that actually there's also other complementary investment that goes together with the institution. You can think about markets, you can think about the rule of law, you can think about bureaucrats that eventually complement the institution and make them work. So it's not just the institution per se, but there are other sort of set of smaller institutions, we can say, that can kind of complement the outcome, also difficult to change. So, just to recap the rationale behind the empirical strategy. So they claim that potential settler mortality, so the rate with which European can actually die in a specific environment, is going to determine whether European will settle or not. So they will base the decision of settling on the disease environment. The settlement that they create in the environment where it was allowed, actually they were allowed to stay because the disease environment was actually a favorable one, created and gave life to early institution, what they call proto-institution, which means like the beginning of some kind of institution. Because of the mechanism that generates a very high cost in changing institution, the institutions that were established at the very beginning persisted for a long time, and so the institution that we find at the beginning of the history of this colony still can kind of be considered a proxy for current institutions, and current institutions are the ones that shape economic growth, so are the ones that impact the economic performance. So this is the rationale, the economic mechanism behind their identification strategy. To answer your question, what are the measurements for economic performance? They use log of GDP per capita in 1975 and 1995, log of output per worker in 1988. Then they include some proxies for current institution, and the one that we are interested into is the average protection against expropriation risk in between 1985 and 1995. See? So think about the small model that we saw last week about the risk expropriation. This is how they tested. Okay? So the theory, the aspects that we saw in terms of incentive and outcome, the theoretical mechanism that we saw last week, it gets tested in this way. They also use as another proxy for economic performance the constraints on executives in 70, 90, and the first year of independence of the former colony. And then for proxy of early institution, they use the constraint on executive and the index of democracy, which is an index which is calculated by, one is the World Bank institution, but there are also other institutions, think tank, that every year compile an index. I think it's from 1 to 7, if I remember. And what do they find? As you can see, there's a negative correlation between settler mortality and the average protection against expropriation in 1985 and 1995. At the top of the graph, you can see Australia, USA, Canada, and New Zealand. And at the bottom, you can see some African country, Mali, Nigeria, Ghana. And then a positive relationship between the average protection against expropriation risk and GDP. And this is actually quite, you can see that it's quite well defined, linear and positive relationship between these two. How do we read this graph? This is correlation, eh? Guys, how do we read this graph?
Strong positive correlation.
Between what?
Between GDP today and expectations.
What does that mean? What's the implication of that? Countries that have a very strong average protection against expropriation risk do have a higher growth. On top, as you can see, really the top of the graph, top of the line, what country can you see? USA. Okay? The country that probably has the strongest law against expropriation risk is considered to have also at the same time correlation highest growth. What's the implication for this? Do you remember what we said in the very tiny simple model, micro model that we saw a few weeks ago? If I want to provide incentive for a farmer to exert effort, make investment, improve the outcome of production, I have to make sure that the expropriation risk is low. The results that we found at the micro level, simple model, still holds when we aggregate it for all the countries that you can think of. Countries that perform better in the aggregate, macro level, are countries that protect property rights better than others. Private property rights. Huh? This is what this graph is telling you. So think about the extension of the results that we saw from a micro level to the macro level. It's like if we aggregate for every individual, you still get that. Yes?
So is this like specifically referring to colonization? Because obviously the colonizers, of course, they have like, you know, great protection against that because they're the ones that are doing it. So is that where it links into colonization?
Not really. The link here is that the link you have to think of here is that countries that were colonizer at the time, because we are talking about the Western European colonizer, were countries that, and we will see that in a minute, used to organize their institution either according to common law or civil law. And especially, we will see that in a minute, one of the two has a very strong protection of property rights. So because they were settling, remember that the USA was a colony, yeah? Because they were settling in this different country, because there wasn't a disease environment that will prevent settlement, they were replicating the sort of institutional environment that they had at home. Yes?
Couldn't you argue that, like, the USA, like, it was literally, yeah, the UK, like, sent settlers over, it was, like, basically, apart from the native, like, population there, it was barely, like, yeah, there was barely any, like, existing populations there, whereas, like, these other countries, they have existed for a while, so they've already, yeah.
That's right, that's absolutely right. And this is why, if you remember what I showed you, we will see that in a minute. Actually, let me put it on. We will see that immediately. So one of the conditions that allowed settlers to stay in a country was also the level of the density of the population they found. Of course, it was easier to settle in countries that were scarcely populated because there was no fight to put up with the local population. You have a lot more land available, so you will settle together with the disease environment in a much easier way. And once you settle, you will replicate the type of institution that you had in your own country. So I'm not showing you this. I'm not showing you the table with the results. You can have a look. I just want you to remember the outcome of the results. So don't get scared about the tables of results if you can read it. That's not important. The story, it's easy enough to read without looking at the econometric model. But just remember that settlement mortality, the variable settlement mortality, explain 50% of the variation in early institution. This is a lot. Huh? Again, we're talking about, and you will see that, a very limited number of observations. Sometimes we don't get to 100. They don't get to 100, which is a very small number of observations. Past institutions explain between 24 and 32% of the variation in current institution. Think about the persistent effect. And current institution explain 0.94% of the income per capita, and output per worker at 0.98. This is a lot. Huh? This is a big impact. So former colonies with better institution have better today economic performance. What I found extremely interesting for me is that the conclusion they found for African countries in particular, because what they claim is that when we control for all the other elements, talking about disease environment, other unobservable, it comes out that what makes these countries poor is not the lack of cultural aspect or the geographical factor, is actually worse institution. And this is a big statement, a big claim, that at the time was really, I should say, quite strong, and gave them a lot of controversial debate. This result has been criticized by many people. To a certain extent, we're not talking about the critique, the papers that criticize the work. There might be some faults in the econometrics, mainly due to the data availability. They took data from missionary, from churches, from sailors, accounts, notes. So you have to think that the work behind the data collection associated to some of these variables has been huge. But because of that, there's a lot of noise. Fair enough, I still believe that the way in which they showed this and the probably soundness of the identification strategy is still valid. The last paper that they have produced of this series looks at the type of institution. Now that we have understood why some countries, some colonies got better institutions than others from the very beginning, they want to understand a little bit more inside the institution's idea. And basically look at whether different type of institution matters, and in particular whether there are some that are more important than others. So in the last paper, made only by Acemoglu and Johnson, which is called Unbundling Institution, they ask what is the relative importance of contracting institution and property right institution for economic outcomes. The difference between the two is that contracting institutions are those that define the rules and the regulation between ordinary citizens. So I can look at the rules that regulate the relationship between a creditor and a debitor, or between customers and suppliers. I can look at the legal system, so the way in which this relationship are regulated. I can look at the cost of tribunal. So all these sort of legal elements that kind of define the relationship between citizens. They define instead property rights institutions as those that regulate the relationship between normal citizen and governments and elites, which are the one that we explored theoretically last week. So this basically defines the relationship between somebody that has a lot of bargaining power versus the citizens, whereas the first one look at the relationship between peers, which are ordinary citizens. The type of contracting institution they focus on is two. One is the common law and the civil law system. One mainly used for the former British colonies, and the other one from former French and German colonies instead. If you have to think about one feature that characterizes the English common law, it's that there's a very low degree of formalism. The bureaucracy associated to the legal process is very small, very limited, whereas instead the one that comes out from the civil law is a lot more complicated and articulated. Again, they use the property right institution to be proxied by the settler mortality and the population density. And exactly as we discussed, the mechanisms of the identification strategy is similar. So it was much easier for the European settlers to settle where the disease environment was favorable and where the population density was also low, as we discussed a few minutes ago. Once the environment that they found was favorable and possibly sparsely populated, the European replicated in those countries the sort of legal environment, a legal setup that they used to have in their own country. This is their empirical strategy. They estimate a cross-sectional data of 71 former colonies. The outcome is the, so the Y dependent variables is the outcome of country in the 90s. And then we have contracting institution, property rights institution, and other control variables. What are the proxy that they use? For the outcome of interest, so YC, they use the GDP per capita, but also private credit and the stock market capitalization as percentage of the GDP. For contracting institution, they look at formal procedure associated with collecting a bounce check, number of distinct procedures involved in the same process, so we'll look at the legal formalism. Whereas for property rights institution, again, they look at the constraint of executive and protection against expropriation from the government. And what do they find? They find that property rights institutions have a first order effect, meaning a very strong effect, on income per capita, ratio of investment, and stock market development. Contracting institutions instead have impact only on the stock market, so a much smaller impact on the GDP per capita. For all the variables, the effect of the contracting institution is a lot smaller in terms of weight, in terms of explaining growth, compared to the property rights institution. And the reason why they conclude that they found this difference is that basically when contracting institutions are not functioning in the right ways, people, citizen, normal citizen, ordinary citizen organize themselves to supplement and fill the gap that the institution is not able to provide with contracting, meaning they can find social norms that sometimes, or informal arrangements, which sometimes are as strong as the one provided by the law. Whereas instead, if the protection against somebody, think about the government with a very high bargaining power, think about a dictatorship or the king, as we saw last week, is not possible to be filled in any other way. So unless the relationship between a head or a head of state and the citizen is regulated by the law, otherwise citizens cannot fill this gap in power. And if there is no chance to limit the power of of expropriation, for example, of the head of the country, citizens will not eventually implement any effort, and therefore the level of growth will be a lot lower. So I hope that today you could see the transition that we made from a micro setup to macro consequences, still via the same type of incentives that apparently still hold when we aggregate by country. Any question? I'll see you soon, guys. Yes. It would be great if you could do that, because I've got a few students coming today. You can come, but it might be a wait. Okay? Yeah, I'm doing it.
Can I ask you a quick question now?
Yeah?
Just with this, with the econometric, you look at like one dependent variable.
Yeah.
Here you're saying there's multiple dependent variables.
Yes, because they test different. So, because you want to see whether your results are actually strong, robust, rather than using just one variable, you use more on the left-hand side, because you want to see whether the setup that you have is still, and the results you find are invariant when you change the dependent variable. It's just like an extra test.
And I was getting confused with the reduced form results.
What does that mean?
Yeah, like the implication for it. I know maybe that's not a solid question because I think it's quite a big explanation.
Let's talk more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, indeed.
So just feedback on the platform, and when I click on the link, it opens a 2022 feedback, not the 2024 feedback.
This one? So the one that I posted today?
Yeah.
I'll check.
That's it, because we're just showing
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll check. Yeah, of course. That's in an hour, but I've got lots of people coming today. So I'll see you, but you might have to wait. Okay. We can do next week. We can do Thursday. I can see some people. Drop me an email and I'll see you.
I know the okay with regards to like the mitigating. Is there anything else I need to do? I've already filled it.
Yeah, I haven't replied yet to you. No. No, you haven't.
Oh, okay, so that's it. That's it. I just fill out the form and then just wait. And then if they do accept it, what percentage will the midterms from? Oh, just erase it completely. Okay, and then all the way to the pass. All right. Okay. Thank you.
You will. Can you make me a favor? If you get an answer from them, when you get an answer from them, can you let me know?
Okay, I'll email you.
Okay.
All right. I'll just forward you the email. All right.
Hi. Hi. Yes. I do remember you. Yes. So today is a big busy. So of course yes, but it might be lots of people coming, so you might have to wait. If you want, I can see you on Thursday.